Hi, this is Jennifer, and I'll be doing my book on the Bread Givers. The Bread Giver book is based on the Smolinski family, with the main character, Sarah, who not only was the main character, she was a narrator and the youngest. Reb was the father of the family. Reb was a Jewish holy man who surrounded his life with only his prayers and his Jewish religious books. Reb also meddled with his daughter's life in controlling of who they can marry and when they can marry. But the most important thing here that kind of stood out was that Reb was not the provider of the home, but instead all the women were the provider of the home. And he would on a daily tell the women that God did not listen to women and women did not have a place in heaven because women's place is only to provide and serve men. Even though these are the kind of words in our own culture we would think is insane in no way, back in 1920, this is how it was for them, and in the Jewish culture, or at least in his eyes, this is how it was supposed to be. This is not typical behavior of a Jewish culture. Bessie was the oldest, and Bessie was the main breadwinner. Bessie did have the opportunity to marry off with a man that she did want to be with, and he actually wanted her to work for his factory, but not as a factory worker, but to actually run the factory business with him. Normally, when a family marries off a daughter, it's the father who pays the dowry. However, their father Reb was a very selfish person, and instead he felt that men should be paying him for his daughters. Well, Bessie lost the opportunity to truly be with the man she wanted to love. So later on, she had to settle with being with a fish peddler that she didn't really care for. But however, he was a widower and she did care for his kids, and he paid for her to be with him. Excuse me. Next in line was Marcia. Marcia was the pretty one and was considered vain. Marcia saved up any little money that she had extra and she would buy her own things like toiletries. The rest of the family had to share them. And though most of them thought she was vain, Sarah did not see her as being a vain person. She actually saw her as someone who cared for herself and cared for the way she looked and did what she did to get her things. Next in line to be married off, because Marcia didn't get married at first, was Fania. Fania actually fell in love with a poet who was going to school at nighttime, and she fell in love with him because she loved the letters that he wrote to her because he spoke to her heart. Unfortunately to Reb, he thought that writers don't make money, so he denied them their marriage and he married her off to one of the Jewish guys in the community who offered Reb money to marry her. And yes, she was able to travel and get out of poverty and everything. However, she wasn't happy because he never was able to speak to her heart. Marcia eventually was able to leave the house because what Reb thought that he was a diamond dealer, her husband made a deal with him that he would eventually give her money. However, he was a con artist, and just like, Reb was treating his daughter and like selecting himself over his family, Marcia's husband did the same thing. He left her with 3 kids and living in poverty and starvation while he was off conning people and enjoying the life and the good meals. In presenting the problem was Reb. Reb got involved in all his children's matters, and not only that, he also had his wife working for him. The fact that the women had to work hard, almost like slave labor, live in poor conditions while he lived in good conditions and had a room just for his holy books, and ate the best meals that came to the house while his family was starving. Shaking with starvation was the exact words of the book. And he also took a large amount of the income that the women would bring into the house to give to other families. The thought was nice, and it's appreciated to think that, at least he's giving back to the community. However, his own family was starving. Another was a choice of love. It is still common in some Jewish families to be set up still to get married, but usually around this time, they know each other and they have a choice. But back then, even though they didn't have a choice, the father still had to pay dowry. But his thing was he was basically marketing his children. His children were only worth money, and if he was a man of, man of faith and stuff like that, um, he took what he read in the Bible, in the Quran, as how he wanted to read it, not how it actually was. The result of all this is that when Sarah was watching all this, and eventually it was going to be her time to be married off, she knew that that's not what she wanted. What she wanted was an education. And she knew that the only thing that was stopping her from true love and an education was her father. However, she was faithful to her father. She did love her father and she respected her father, especially when they would sit around together and he would read from the Torah, and she loved his education, but she wanted it too. And when he was trying to force her not to have it and cut her off from that and try to marry her off, enough was enough. And she just took a risk. And so when she took that risk, she risked going into starvation or death, living in the streets, and being worse off than she already was. And she just couldn't think what was worse than where she was. So she took that risk. The strength theories in this book was that when she had enough, she had the courage, the drive to get up and go. Starvation. She'll never go hungry again. She knew when she reached the end of where she needed to be that she would have money to provide for herself. She would have the education, and no matter how many classes she failed, which she failed about 2 or 3 of them, she was not going to give up because she wanted her education that bad, and she knew that she can get it. And the only thing that was stopping her, besides her father, were other men in her life. Like it was other educators that were keeping her back. There was professors that wouldn't help her when she needed tutoring. So everything she did on her own. She worked 12-hour shifts, and then she studied on her own without a tutor, even if it meant taking the same class 3 times. Best of all, love. She was going to love who she wanted. She was not going to be told who she can love. And she eventually did find that love, but she found it on her own, and she found it naturally. When speaking of the systems, her microsystem was her family, the stress of the poverty, the job that she had to work starting at 10 years old selling the herring, and the job that she had to work at the same time as going to school. So her 12-hour shift job and her going to school was affecting her microsystem. The mesosystem was her father, his faith, and his greed. And because of her father and his faith and his greed, the women in the family all suffered for it. The exosystem is the father's bad business gone wrong. When all the money he had, or the family had, from all the dowry that he got when Sarah was left in his house, he risked it and bought a house, and just like he got conned by one of his daughter's husband, he met another con man because the deal was $500 for the store with all the food in it, even though his wife warned him that it was too good to be true to wait for her to arrive to help him make that business deal. He was damned if he was going to have a woman tell him what to do. So in doing that, he risked the whole entire family's money and bringing them more deeper down into poverty, not even enough for him to donate to help other families. How did this hurt everybody? Well, when Sarah had enough and she said she wasn't going to take it anymore, Sarah left the streets, and she took the first job that she could and worked as hard as she could and lived in the dingiest place, but she got to where she needed to get to. She got her education and she got the needs that she needed. However, doing so, she risked losing her family, and her mother had to end up taking care of Reb. You would think, with all the kids gone, that he would at least step up and help out the family. However, this is not what happened. Her mother literally worked to death, and Reb just watched it happen. The macro system that comes into play was the Jewish culture, the traditions that they followed, and the religion. However, with the macro system, it's kind of, like I said, the way this family was following the tradition is not the typical tradition of the Jewish culture. It was this one individual father who took it upon himself to read the Torah and see it how he felt it fit for him. I selected conflict theory for this because it was the inequalities that was going on. The father sacrificing the living area. All the women, including his wife, had to live in a smaller area, and he had a room all to not only to himself, but he had a room for his books. The women were the breadwinners, however, they were not winning the bread. All they got were the scraps. And literally, when I say scraps, they were the description of what they ate was pretty much they would take what's left over, the potato peels, and they would boil them and make potato peel soup. While Reb actually got to eat the potatoes themselves. And the herring was never eaten because the herring had to be sold on the street for money to pay for the rent. Dress the best. How is it that a man who does not provide for his family or even contribute to his family gets to wear the best of the best? When he married his daughters off and he made men pay him the dowry, the first thing he did before he put the money into the house was take care of himself. He made sure he had the best shoes, the best suit, because he had to go out and read the Torah to the people. And so outside of the house, he was viewed as this amazing, man of God. And at home, he just did not put his family first because his dedication to his religion was more important than his family. And not only that, but his dedication to help others came before his own family as well. Here are a few scholarly literatures that I use for comparison with my book review. When I read through the culture perspective on codependency and women and the immigrants working the sweatshop, combating poverty, women during the Great Depression, everything that I told you was very common. Women were working the sweatshops. Immigrants were extremely poor and everything because they thought coming to America was going to be simply amazing, and they literally got rid of all their stuff. There was no need to lug that there because they were going to get better things here. When they got here, however, it did not end up being that way, and a lot of them ended up being, pretty much factory slave workers legally. And the parents and some of the adults, they died young and died of starvation and everything. This is when all the kids ended up being left behind, and a lot of kids went into slave labor as well. Of course, they call it a different name, but that's another book, another story. The personal reflection on this was that originally, this family was not born into poverty. This family actually came from money when Sarah's mother was going to be married off to Reb. He was just one of many selections that her family had to select. She wished she would have been able, if she can do it again, she would have selected the pianist, or the artist. However, the person who came from money was actually Reb's family. So money talks when it came down, to keeping the tradition and the status of that family. Word of Hashem, word of God. Back in those times, and even still in this time, culture follows religion, and in those types of religion and culture, if that is the word and that is what you follow, and when you drift off from that, you do risk losing your family. It was not uncommon back in the 1920s for parents to just let their kids go and not even think twice about it. Loving children was not like the way a loving home is now. There was no like huggy and kissies and snuggle times and stuff like that. That wasn't very uncommon. So if your kid kind of drifted away and left, didn't follow the rules, then that was just one less person you had to feed. And the last part I want to mention is that we're different, but we're not too different. We like to say we're a different culture, but we're not that much different. The women then to the women in America, or even women now, the only difference is some of them were called housewives, some of them were called farm helpers, milking maids. They were the ones who made butter. They're the ones who did the milking. So was it that much different? Not really. We're different, but not too much.